So please, here we go. One of the great joys of teaching poetry over a long period of time is discovering the unflagging interest our students have in this art form that on its own will rarely earn anyone a dime, but without which, as the poet Muriel Rukeyser has said, there would be an intolerable hunger. My students are sometimes the ones who clue me in about the most interesting poets on the scene. And 2 years ago, for example, as we were putting together the inaugural issue of AMP magazine, then Hofstra MFA student Ediola Jones, serving as AMP's managing editor, decided to interview the poet, academic, and spoken word performer Tara Betts for the AMP blog. Jones' interview let me know that Tara Betts was someone whose work I simply had to read more of and hear. Many of her live performances have made it onto YouTube. I love her voice, a contralto that can rise, ferociously sweet, and which resonates with intelligence and emotion in all registers. Her work for stage and page considers travesties and tragedies, the murder of Trayvon Martin, deaths by stray bullets, the history of torture, abuse, and neglect, of Black American men, women, and children, each given a face even if the names have been lost. Betts writes with incredible power, too, of the everyday. Inadequate bras, eating alone, acupuncture, phases of the moon, rye bread and cheddar, garlic and cilantro, music of all kinds, and spiders, in particular a spider named Craig. And embossed on the stark white cover of Betts's new book, Break the Habit, is an image of a glass figurine, a bright black and yellow spider. And my immediate thought when I saw the book for the first time was, now here's a poet. Actually, I thought, here's my kind of poet. You see, my most recent book also has an insect on its cover. When my book came out, someone, maybe not my kind of poet, said to me that surely my cover wouldn't, quote, speak to my demographic. And for a while I wondered, was my demographic interested in blue skies and buttercups? But certain hardy insects and certain hardy poets have much in common. And if you don't know this yet, you'll want to ask Tara to read her spider poems. Tara Betts was born in Illinois, received her MFA in creative writing from New England College in 2007. She received her PhD in English and creative writing at Binghamton University in 2014. She's taught at Rutgers University and conducted workshops for the Ms. Foundation, City Girls, which is a substance abuse rehab center for teen girls, Cook County Jail, and the Cook County Juvenile Detention Center, the Cooper Union, the Dodge Foundation's Poets in the Schools program, London's Roundhouse, and the Binghamton Poetry Project. And she's currently on the faculty at the University of Illinois, Chicago. Her work has appeared in Essence, the Steppenwolf Theater production Words on Fire, Obsidian 3, Callaloo, PMS, Meridian, Drum Voices Review, WSQ, Columbia Poetry Review, Ninth Letter, Hanging Loose, Drunken Boat, I love this, Mythium, Reverie, and Wound Poetry. Her work has been anthologized in Gathering Ground, Bum Rush the Page, isn't that awesome? Power Lines, Poetry Slam, Black Writing from Chicago, Roll Call, These Hands I Know, Best Black Women's Erotica 2, yes, Hurricane Blues, Homegirls, Make Some Noise, Hip Hop Feminism, Fingernails Across a Chalkboard, and Letters to the World. Her most recent chapbook, 7 by 7, Kwanzaa, was published in 2015. Betts is also the co-editor of the Beiging of America, Personal Narratives About Being Mixed Race in the 21st Century. And she's currently at work on a third poetry collection, a collection of critical essays and translations of poems by Salome Ureña de Enriquez. About Arc and Hue, Betts's first full-length poetry collection. National Book Award winner Patricia Smith writes, Tara Betts's deftly crafted stanzas are infused with a restless lyricism and a Chi-Town girl's sensibility. This debut collection solidifies her status as a defiant and singular voice, a joyous indication of a fresh new direction in poetry. And we're not done yet. Betts has appeared on HBO's Deaf Poetry Jam and in the Black Family Channel series Spoken. She has also been one of the writers/performers in Girl Story, an intergenerational multicultural women's performance collective. She has performed in plays including 2 Southwest V-Day productions of Eve Ensler's Vagina Monologues at Chicago's DuSable Museum. After winning Guild Complex's Gwendolyn Brooks Open Mic Award, she represented Chicago twice at the National Poetry Slam in 1999 and 2000. In 2011 and 2013, Betts was commissioned by the Peggy Choi Dance Company to write a series of poems and monologues for The Greatest, an homage to Muhammad Ali. And her libretto for The Greatest was published in 2013 by Winged City Press. And now break the habit. Tara's new poetry book is full of loss, so much loss. Loss of love and of marriage in particular. But twinned with this loss is its aftermath. And here we have the poet's responding grace. In poem after poem, Betts the woman, never separate from Betts the poet, she shows us what must be done and how. Betts references a body of music and musicians: John Coltrane, Cassandra Wilson, Bonnie Raitt, Adele, Glenn Campbell, and heroes and poets as well: Huey Newton, Angela Jackson, Gwendolyn Brooks. She's not afraid to call on them, to remember their struggles and triumphs as she writes her own. As author John Keane says, Betts shows us through her lyric artistry what self-love and resolve look like. Memory, marriages, music, mistakes, today and today and today, Betts is not afraid, not even in the raw skin of grief, to remember love and never deny it. I cannot deny what rocked and kept me, what once made me feel safe, gone now. Ashes, dust, burned, singed, blown. She writes in the book's final poem, Go. Betts remembers love, right down to its lyric and ever-present body, as in her perfect poem, Orgasm, which concludes, fingers and mouths were meant to be cartographers of the body that make babies, or just make one long night last and hover among the and remember. Please, let's welcome the unforgettable Tara Betts.
Let me just get situated since the mic is doing unanticipated things. I just need a second. Can you hear me so far?
Yes.
That's without the mic. Imagine if I can get this to work. If it will work. Let's see. Nope, it's too big. So I'll have to wing it and hold it. La. Okay. So I want to read some new poems tonight, so it can be a little bit lighter. As she talked about, the book deals a lot with loss. I'm going to read some of those poems as well. The one I want to start with is kind of inspired by one of the musicians you did not name. And if I'm on the East Coast, I have to invoke his name. If you have not fallen in love with Hector Lavoe, you need to listen to Hector Lavoe. I always think of the line says, Pronto llegará un día de mi suerte, and he's basically saying, one day my day of luck will arrive, or my good luck will arrive. But this is for a different song called Aguanile. When I Loved You. A time marked me not knowing better, as if you spelled out some language of my ancestors in stones, and somehow I began remembering those words, spelling and signing, then dancing and singing. One night, you stopped in a parking lot where we munched on fries from cardboard boxes, and Hector Lavoe sung Aguanile, a phrase he wheedled gracefully from Spanish and Yoruba until I did not care about being parked in an empty parking lot. I flung my door open, and you turned the volume up until the blacktop echoed. My white skirt spun in circles around your car, and I laughed like gold bells. When the song ended, the hollow of each bell crushed a clapper inside, into balls of crinkled poil. One of my favorite places on the East Coast is in Paterson, New Jersey, believe it or not. It's a place that's really ripe for poetry. Allen Ginsberg was that's his childhood home, and I always think of the Paterson Falls as they appear in William Carlos Williams' book of the same title of the town. But this was about a time when I saw the Paterson Falls intersect with another historic site there. I'll leave it at that. The Paterson Falls and Hinchliffe. One of our first dates is the best memory that I can cradle about Paterson, New Jersey. You parked the car on the warm June night, a hushed crunch of gravel under the tires. The tiny suspension bridge felt safe when you led me to its center. The Paterson Falls constant churn that bred silk factories gone. I gasped because it looked just like the battered copy of Williams Paterson on my cramped bookshelf. But this one roared a perpetual sigh of water, leaving a mist on my face, where you softly leaned in, and I was not afraid on this tiny bridge above a high drop and water rushing white. As we walked away, I spotted the concrete wall with Greek athletes on tiles embedded near its top. When I asked, "What is this abandoned place?" with a sign that reads Hinchliffe, you said it was a Negro League stadium. I imagined Satchel Paige pitching and Minnie Minoso in his prime. My quick squeeze on your arm and a smile was all I needed to convince you to climb through the folded back tear in the chain link fence with me. I stared at the silent empty field around us. New trees, slender and slightly taller than us, sprouted in the modest bleachers. There's a history that I cannot write when decaying, forgotten places cling to the present. There is a history that I thought we could write, but those early drafts were scrapped. So I know there's a lot of talk about what hip-hop is now. And I have students now who are like, hip-hop isn't saying anything. It's not doing this. It's not doing that. And I just want to be like, maybe that's a different hip-hop from the hip-hop that made me fall in love with hip-hop. If that makes sense. That's a lot of hip-hops all at once. But one of them, and I mentioned it earlier to the students I talked to earlier today, was Public Enemy. So if you know Public Enemy, aren't they from Long Island?
That's right.
I was going to say, give it up for Long Island. But, so they appear in my opening poem of the book because Chuck D, who's the prominent voice in Public Enemy, said that hip-hop was Black America's CNN. I tend to think now, maybe not so much, but at the time, it taught me a lot about history. So this is about what Public Enemy taught me about a historic person. A lesson from the Terror Dome. Echoes of sirens blared while phrases belted from the boom of Chuck D's voice, left imprints sinking into memory that bobs up when buoyant history is necessary. The blast and thump of Welcome to the Terrordome droned intent with Flavor Flav's clock swinging on his neck, a manic, shining searchlight beaming from a black planet that still embodies fear and chaos for some. And when the dancers marched and pivoted in lockstep military formation in front of a target with crosshairs imposed on a black man's silhouette, Chuck D insisted to everyone in earshot, "Come on down," and the sample's rapid response, "Get down," fired back. But the internal rhyme in the shooting of Huey Newton never left my head. It sent me, curious, to a small Midwestern library before internet searches streamed into houses, so my finger traced columns in an antiquated guide to periodicals, flipped through a card catalog's long shelves, looked for ends, then Newton. Who was he? And when I clicked the microfiche onto spindle and rolled through articles, moving across a white screen, squares of photos and text rolled one frame at a time until the brief article appeared. Black Panther found dead in Oakland. I shook my head and silently asked how much of the story is missing, how I wouldn't even know about the bullet dropping Newton if Chuck hadn't told me. So, speaking of hearing things on people's radios, at the time when I was working on this book, I was living in upstate New York. I hope nobody gets mad at me, but I'm not a fan of Rush Limbaugh. I'm not a fan of our supposed president. I didn't vote for him, so I don't call him my president. So if you want to be mad, you can be mad at me later. I'm okay with that. You know, I respect your right to be mad, just like you should respect mine to be mad. I'll leave it at that. So this is a poem that's kind of based in me living my life the way Rush Limbaugh was describing it this day I heard it. And it's the title comes from a book by Black liberation theologist James Cone. You know, I think God wants everybody to be free. You know, prophetic fragments. Prophecy is rendered as whole mythic animal. It twists limbs free and open, wide billowing spread of white dragging reams over daylight. People turn their heads, ignore quiet attrition. I mince downstairs with tender ankle and sore foot, lean into a railing with weight a lover never held. There is no easy sweep that foretells what comes. Besides, one day, steady breath stops. I count inhalations as I deliberately deposit weight on each foot. Underneath, a house's foundation gradually crumbles. The water may be poison beyond redemption. It runs, wears away rock, cuts down soil, carries wet in small measures. Prophecy announces titles like Liberation filling my bag with paperbacks and hardcover spines by poets and preachers, like I did that morning when a man sat in a dust-beaten truck, listening to the pundit yelling about university students touting liberation theology while sitting in living rooms of dangerous radicals. His truck windows are open and his radio blares. I silently admit the truth. I have done all those transgressions, part of a list longer than this diatribe or James Cone's tome in my heavy book bag. He pulls off without looking at me. I lift my bag strap, bring it closer while I walk to the bus stop. We head to different destinations. Both of us will eventually become dust, but prophecy calls, insists the future will fragment the myth that he listens to and expects. So, I'm gonna run around. I'm gonna read a poem I normally don't read, since you mentioned it. So, And the reason why I don't read it is because I've gone to reading sometimes, and then somebody's 75-year-old grandfather's like, I like that poem. So that'll just be the precursor. Orgasm. Now I'm going to laugh. Stop laughing. But in any case, if the first kiss is the precursor, then this is the bullet, soldered from thought that presses down, even as we say, smile, conversation, personality, respect. There is a trigger cocked toward finding what happens when the well bottom of kisses is struck. What dwells there is ladling another smell into nostrils, clavicle played as flute, palms pressed to mattress, the push of body against body. Don't deny the blush of your curious. Pink speaks to hardening heat, dew point, length, circumference, curve. The hooks of questions drag along the length of torso, past nipples, navel, unmentioned hair. You want to know if this is the drawbridge of shutters, how the shell might crack while the membrane beneath spills its serious pulse. Fingers and mouths were meant to be cartographers of the body that makes babies, or just make one long night last and hover among the M's and remember. When the bridge lowers, we try to conceal, but the insistence of crossing is still there. One demanding rush flares through bodies. A cannon of multiple shots storms those bent on being ruins. All it takes is aim, a target hitting its mark. Then we charge toward the bullet. If you need to fan yourselves, I understand. So, okay. Now we'll move on to grilled cheese. And no, don't ask me to make you a sandwich. Does anybody remember that? There was this point where people would be like, you know, cats would be like, tell her to make me a sandwich. No, I'm not going to make you nothing. Go make me a sandwich. But anyway, that's another story. This is called Fancy. Slide the rye bread a bit thicker than pre-sliced wheat. Ease a knife down a chunk of cheddar, thin planes of orange. Add 2 slices of tomato for each sandwich. Drop the blade in a steady chop on fresh cilantro. Peel away dried sheets, shrouding cloves of garlic. Chop their earthiness into tiny cubes. Take the half globe of onion, cut it into squares that join the garlic. Let them dance in the heavy black skillet until they sizzle golden. Lift the spatula and slide under a pile of savory layers: rye, cheddar, tomato slice, cilantro, garlic, cheddar, rye. Gently add 1 sandwich, then another, a pair caught hissing in the skillet's wide mouth. The one with the cheddar melted is on your lover's plate. Notice his noticing when others choose to court oblivious. Sit down with grilled cheese that he proclaims fancy. Consider tomato soup. Food is not your only comfort. So, the story behind the spider, right? I was having a really difficult time finishing the book, and I was like, what am I going to end this book with? And as I said, I was living in upstate New York, a lot of solitary time, and at one point there was a garden spider that had taken up residence on my front porch, not in the building, but just on the steps, and it was so big I didn't have the heart to move it or kill it, so I named it. And I started telling my friends about it. I said, yeah, Craig's on the porch, he's chilling, you know, he's doing his thing. They'd be like, is Craig ever gonna leave the block? Nah, I think he's one of them homies that stays on the block. You know, and then I kept wondering if Craig was gonna have a girlfriend, and I said, well, his girlfriend will be Neil, like Neil Long in Fridays. And so it just got more and more comedic. But there was a point, I was talking to one of my professors, and we were talking about how people in isolated situations will tend to befriend vermin in their cells, particularly if they're in prison, because they don't have companionship. And I realized I would be like I'd be coming home on the bus, I'd be like, is Craig on the porch? And I was like, oh my God, I have to get out of this place. But the unusual thing was, Craig wasn't the only spider I saw. I started seeing them everywhere. And so I started thinking about Lucille Clifton's book, The Terrible Stories, which, if any of you are familiar with her work, it's one of her books that came out. It's been a long time since it was published, but it's all about this fox who would come around to her front porch every day around the same time. So she started kind of building this myth around this fox that would come to her building every day. And I said, I think this spider is my fox. So I said, okay, Craig, we'll get some poems going for you. So I'm going to read his poem and one of the poems, because as I started to read about spiders, I'm like, they're really violent in relationships. And I'm like, humans aren't very different, So when you think about it that way, it's like, oh, this works. I see how this fits. But I'll go with that. An introduction. The summer's end marked September's bid toward chill. The spider set up its web like a Harlem vendor, spreading gleaming angles, spun just to the right of my front porch. He extended a greeting with appendages, each limb bent toward acres and centers of net, fatal trap, and home. His web flexed, bounced under his weight. His stripes adjusted like a precise black and white sweater to stave off the cold. He was not poisonous, but his strike stings if provoked. I gave him a wide berth. I had been drained before, and there was not much left for me to break free from being some bundled prey in this quieter place, away from all the webs that I called the city's embraces. In my comings and goings, I said, hey, good morning, good night, to a creature who never feeds on me or demands sustenance, even though he was large enough for me to expect words, large enough to name Craig on a 5-step stoop with an awning. So, if you study entomology, the study of insects, other than spiders are actually more related to crustaceans because they're exoskeleton. Female spiders excrete a hormone on their web. So the pheromones, if the male spider smells it in some species, they will tear down the web that she builds before another male spider can smell her pheromones. So the poem kind of started with that. And then we know what happens to male spiders if they mess up, right? It's a lot grimmer than tearing down the web. Yes. They might get ate. So I'll leave it at that. The poem is called Dragline. A spider does not differ from other women. Silk unfurls around her, faintly coated in her scent that draws them, fills dreams with ripping lines that frame her limbs, that she frames. They watch her ripen into swelled sack of eggs and silk spun around her balanced body until one male studies her lines, symmetry, a growing net flirting in the afternoon sun until he pulls frayed and fragmented strands into flattened strings that catch no wind and clump into hanging rubble. She is not the first woman to lose canvas or a poem that came freely. They know she must submit or life stops then and there. She bundles him in honeyed hormones and death if he fails to pluck the thread of courtship or jump dance just so, just long enough to spark new lives in her and leave her to start a new trail of nesting angles beneath her nimble limbs. And we believe this is natural. So, I think I'm going to read one more poem from the book, and I'll read some new stuff on my laptop. So hopefully that won't block the recording or the view. But I'll read the closing poem in the book. It's a golden shovel. So if any of you are fans of Terrence Hayes, it's a form that he created where he used the end word of each line to spell out a line from a Gwendolyn Brooks poem. This is, I believe, in the Golden Shovel anthology. So they had a big book where they just did a bunch of poems like that. But this one takes a line from Gwendolyn Brooks' poem, Old Mary. So at the end, like, if you flip the book like this, these lines, like on this side of the poem, it spells out this. My last defense is the present tense. It little hurts me now to know I shall not go. So you may hear those words again and it sounds like, oh, there they are. Okay. Go. After Gwendolyn Brooks' Old Mary. If you examine the embers of my life, they will be burned to the last. If anything is worth loving, defense rings its resonant siren. Weaponry is an option that boldly blacksmiths the tender blooming sprout of the present. I seek methods to fortify a steely tense because the heart requires smelting. It wavers in hungry yellow tongues, little strong licks of heat that echo many hurts, and I cannot deny what rocked and kept me, what once made me feel safe, gone now. Ashes, dust, burned, singed, blown to a language that wind and soil must know. This wild whisper runs inside me, and I must answer it, or the rustling of skin shall molt what is left. I will not allow myself to live half a life, so I must go. So, after you write that kind of book, you want to do something different. We were talking about this earlier. I wish some of you had been by earlier. There was a lot of food, too. I always feel like they try to stuff the poet while they're here. And you go home and your refrigerator is empty because you've been running around in the streets. But I found myself writing more lighthearted stuff, things that are about things that I enjoy. So, even though some of the poems are still kind of bleak, are there any Walking Dead fans? No? There's 3. Okay. Does anybody like Sasha? Or sometimes, hey, Sasha is gangster. Anyway, I'm not going to argue with you. But there's a poem I have about Sasha because there's this moment that just made a lot of sense to me watching the show. Before Sasha lights a bonfire. When my brother gets bitten by a shell of a boy, a gun molds itself to my shoulder. Armor shatters, then crashes, sticks to organs and weighs down my feet. I still keep moving. By the time I bury Tyrese, I am used to digging. I watched him cut through hungry stumblers, rasps and rotting, gone silent and fallen. Tyrese picked flowers and cradled babies in the trunks of his arms. I knew if we both survived every crumbling wall, each collapsed fence, he and I would look at each other, laugh, and remember. Instead, I lose him. After losing Bob and his jokes to slow, rapid dementia pressed from undead teeth, understand why I hunt walkers, mow them down, quiet their relentless half screams, pile them into a pit and fall on top of their finally still bodies. Their decomposing becomes a smell that no longer phases, while my back rests on this huddled mess. On my back, I look up at clouds. Unbelievably, the whites still break and float in clear blue. Maybe I can cry now. Maybe. For a minute. So, I'm going to capitalize on Black Panther for a moment. Yes. I'm mad that there are no toys. Have you heard about the toy shortage? There's like a monument. They just said, we didn't make enough toys. That's my face of disbelief. So, before that, I was becoming seriously infatuated with the love affair between Storm from X-Men and Black Panther, which they've kind of like, they deaded that love story, which makes me feel like Black people fall in love. Why can't they do it in the comic books? So I wanted to write a love letter. It's a short poem. Storm writes to Black Panther. T'Challa, remember when we fought our way out of Hades together? This is what those who truly love spend a lifetime doing, and we escaped. We saved each other, and our embraces held everything from the continent that I missed. We were not mutants, nor Black, nor African, but distillation of spirits. You could invent anything, carry the legacy of generations born by your village, and fight the strongest of the pantheon, while some would have us occupy the smallest storylines. Forgetting has never been our option. We carry our powers and our history, a color line of veils, a rucksack without acres. Tell me, that wasn't enough to call us future. So, any Star Trek fans then? No? Okay, we're going.
Come on.
I'm still in love with Lieutenant Uhura. I feel like she should be my auntie.
Woo.
But y'all are going to be a hard crowd right now. So, I will move on to a different subject altogether. Since the Olympics, at least, I'm trying to remember, was this the Summer Olympics? This was a minute ago. So, we all know of Simone Biles, the gymnast, Simone Manuel, the swimmer, or did I mix them up? In any case, this is a poem for Simone Biles and Simone Manuel, the two Simones. Miraculous is a woman, her dedication, her skill, the body that she wills to slice, air high above heads, land precisely. Her squared shoulders, she tumbles in a leotard, commands every shift in muscles, the masters of limbs in her own flip, the twist of her body swift, exacting as she loops, spirals her way to lift arms upright, arch her back. Miraculous is the woman who snaps into focus taut line as she barely breaks the water's surface. No jet engine or combustion ignites her to push through past the others, determined to make their mark, and she is so focused. Her hands touch the lip of the pool, her nails polished red, white, and blue. She covers her mouth as she bobs in the water and begins to weep. These two Simones, in namesake and spirit, sever wind and water, declare hard-fought victories. Recall another Simone called Nina. She sang loud and clear, I wish I could know how it feels to be free. So, I don't know if anybody's a fan of, Arthur Miller's The Crucible? No, at least a couple people nodding. Y'all don't like anything. This reminds me of some of my undergrads I've taught in the past. I'll be like, do you like food? They sit there and look at me. Do you like movies? They sit there and look at me. Do you like television? I said, then your lives are boring. You don't do anything. But in any case, if you've read The Crucible or Maurice Conde's novel, I, Tituba, they both write about one character who was real. And that character was a woman named Tituba. She was the only black witch in the Salem witch trials. She's the only person who survived. We don't know where she went. And I was like, isn't that typical? We don't know where she went. So I said, you know what? I said, I got to write something for her. Tituba, Black Witch of Salem. Tituba, the missing hollows of your story echo within myths and shifting details. Centuries later, you are imagined whole. Your name means to atone in Yoruba. The books say West Indian, Arawak, Venezuelan, anything but African. The charges accused you of poisoning children, even though rye flour bears unseen fungus spoiling bread, cakes, and children. We will not know the count of lashes or blows, how often you were slapped or dunked before you said, yes, I am a witch. I serve the devil. We know this. You were the first to confess. You walked away alive. You were bought from bondage, fled Salem with John, birthed a daughter named Violet. Papers prove all of that. Historians and scholars require some breadcrumbs, but these papers let you imitate ether in the night and disappear. So I have to read this poem because John Cusack is tripping. I don't know if you saw. He's mad because they want to do a remake of High Fidelity with the woman as a lead, and he was like, they're going to ruin it. It's going to be a terrible movie. But it's one of my favorite movies, and one of the things that I find problematic with it, though, it's a problematic fave, as people like to say, is that it's really about this guy who has like these, he doesn't look at women like full beings. Like he looks at them as kind of like, well, she's cool because she does this, this, and that. But then he doesn't understand her as a full person at all. So I'm like, okay, there's these 5 women. You hope one of them will take you back after you mess up with your girlfriend who's put up with you. And then you discover none of them work out. So I was like, God, that might be kind of cool if that happened where a woman just kind of like decided if she wanted to be bothered with any of her exes. I like that idea as a premise. But apparently John Cusack doesn't. So, which makes me sad. I'm like, bruh, you from Chicago. You know people can be whack. Anyway, that's another story. I'll read this short poem and I'll close with this. High Fidelity. Cusack declares what you missed about Chicago. How the places with the best music and art tuck themselves into dingy, cramped places. That's not romantic. It's what it was. And you ate food built to insulate you from the hawk. Air talons that cut your face. How the L over Damon makes cameos in the background. How the scene is about love, or at least amicably sharing a bed. Then having a beer because it gets cold outside. Why not talk when your love moves out as you debate the top 5 loves of your life? As if a person could ever be the stew of the best 5 albums you could hold in one hand, or the 10 best R&B songs ever recorded. People play themselves like a tape, over and over, yet there is always one that throws in that one single we forgot we knew or never expected. We wait to put the needle to their etched grooves, to rewind in a deck or twist with a pencil so the song plays. Maybe go back, find a few more. Thank you. I'm sure a few people know what you actually use a pencil for with a cassette, but thanks again, Hofstra, Janet Kaplan, Miss Eppeline Collins, and the people who are working the table, and all of the thoughtful students at Hofstra who pay really close attention to poetry. I've enjoyed the conversations thus far. Maybe we'll talk a little bit more. Thank you again.